What if she never leaves her husband? Am I wasting my time on a relationship that will never fully materialize? Should I give her an ultimatum and risk losing her altogether? Part of me is terrified of being alone again, but another part knows I deserve better than being someone's secret. Despite all this, I find it impossible to walk away.
All right. Today we have Luke Shillings joining us in the studio. Chelsea will be here very soon. But we are going to start off with getting to know Luke and his role in case you missed his prior episode. And from here, I'm just going to go ahead and let Luke introduce himself.
Hello. Well, thank you, Anne-Marie. It's great to be here. It feels like it's been a long time coming, and it's exciting to get started on this slightly different journey, working with you guys. I'm really excited. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Luke Shillings. I'm a relationship and infidelity recovery coach. I have my own coaching business and have had for the last few years. I'm having experienced infidelity from the betrayed side several years ago in my own relationship. I then turned to helping people overcome infidelity regardless of what their specific story was. And it's been interesting. The more work I've done, the more people who reach out to me who have either been the ones who have been unfaithful or in fact are still in active affairs and are trying to see how to move through that and move from that, which I always found interesting. I suppose, given my own story, I always thought I would naturally attract those who have been betrayed, of which, of course, I do have clients on that side as well. But there seems to be something, maybe it's almost like an insider's view in terms of what their partner might be experiencing, having, had or being involved within an affair themselves. So, yeah, really, really fascinating. And then as for my role going forward, at least in this scenario, we are due to launch the Other Man's Group community to run alongside the Other Women community that already exists, which will be a great space for men who find themselves in difficult relationship situations and feel like they haven't really got a safe place to explore and talk about their emotions and their feelings and just their thoughts and their situation, their opinions and views on how they have found themselves in this position and how they want to move forward from it, partly because of societal pressures, because of judgment, because they feel like they can't have these conversations outside of the relationship that they're in directly. And this hopefully will create a space where like-minded people in similar situations will be able to discuss this and hopefully move through it in a path that's best aligned with them as individuals.
Yeah, I'm very excited about the men's community. I have been a member of the Other Women's community since this time last year. This time last year, I was in the community, but I still wasn't talking. So something that I like to remind people is like, you don't have to join and necessarily immediately start putting information out there. You can just join and absorb for a while. I definitely was, I was an absorber. It was like watching other people talk about it and relating. That's where I finally found the courage to be like, okay, I've been here a while. And we found a lot of women end up doing that. They'll be like, I've been here for a couple of weeks, but I'm finally ready to introduce myself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that really resonates for people in this situation. That I don't think it really matters how an affair or betrayal has sort of entered into your world. I think it doesn't really matter whether you are on the betrayed or the unfaithful side. Most people don't set out their life or their relationship goals as having infidelity be part of it, whether you are the person who is engaged in or the one that you have been betrayed or you are the third party. It doesn't, that's never been like, oh, well, that's how I want to live my life. They are the identities that I want you to embody. Of course, that's not how we go through life, or at least most people, I would hope. So having that space where I often see, like, it's almost like three stages. You have that initial observation. You find somewhere and you see that other people are experiencing things similar to what you're experiencing, which creates that sense of validation, that sense of being heard, sense of being understood. But of course, it's still quite concerning because you still feel like you're being judged. And that makes sense because the outside world may judge you, and particularly those who are closest to you. So seeing that first and acknowledging that you're not alone, you're not the only person experiencing this, can be a great first. It's almost like seeing the window of the shop for the first time, and you can sort of look in from the outside and see what's going on, but don't feel like you have to cross that threshold. You don't have to take that step in. And then, of course, over time, you become more accustomed to it. You become more adapted to your environment and to this new setting. And there becomes a point where you think, okay, maybe this is an opportunity to be a bit vulnerable and to maybe start sharing and just putting feelers out there just to see how it gets responded to in a group of people who are in similar situations. And usually it gets responded to better than you perhaps might imagine. Of course, there will be sometimes some quite frank and clear responses, and people will have opinions and people will have their viewpoints, but a community like this offers a safe, a frank and honest, but also respectful environment to allow you to explore that. And then, of course, as time goes by, I'd be interested to hear your take on this as well. Like, the first part is that observation, that awareness. The second part is that being vulnerable and starting to sort of like give some of yourself to the community and to be able to sort of take from that and learn from it. And then I believe there's probably like a third stage where you feel like you have gained something, you've started to process and move through your situation as an individual, and now it feels like you can actually come in and be giving back to those people who were in the position you were when you were stood outside looking in.
Yes. Yeah, I sat and I watched and I listened. And then I even attended a couple of community calls. So I'm not sure if the men's community will be set up exactly
It'll be
like
we're
the
very similar.
same. But there were these wonderful calls, and it was so strange to just get in like a group chat. And I was like, oh, hi, I introduced myself like yesterday. And I didn't talk all that much, but it was like then seeing everybody was like real. And then hearing how people were utilizing the community. They were like, I'm going no contact, or I finally put up this boundary. And every time I reach for my phone, instead of messaging that person, I come to the group and I message you guys. And you get a lot healthier responses when you come in and you just are like, having a rough time today, set a boundary, having trouble upholding it. And it was like over time, it became because so much of the modern day affair is in your phone. So you
So
also have this other element of addiction, this other like dopamine hit that you're constantly reaching for. And so to reach for it and then go to somewhere constructive where the only people who are going to judge you are the people who are, they can't judge you too hard because they're there for their own reasons as well. And that kind of open minded conversation you can't just find anywhere. Like the safety of the community is definitely where it was at for me because I didn't talk verbally about my affair outside of disclosing to my husband and then him being like, you're forgiven. I don't want to talk about it. I didn't talk about it for almost 8 years, maybe. I told one person it didn't go very well. They just kind of wanted to skip over it. And I was like, I'm never going to tell anyone again. And
and
let me tell you, that's not constructive. Just talking about it gets things moving. Like good, bad, ugly, it at least gets things like rolling. It can get you unstuck.
it really highlights that the way that we process emotions, the way that we process difficult things. Most of us, particularly in sort of Western society, are taught to man up, to get over it, to move on, to bury it, to carry on regardless. Being based in the UK, it's that stiff upper lip. It's the, keep calm and carry on. That is the kind of underlying subtle messaging that many of us can receive. So when it comes to these really difficult conversations, and they are difficult conversations, we can't pretend that they're not. There are some really difficult conversations, and there will be some people that are hurt, and obviously yourselves included. Like everybody gets hurt. It doesn't really matter where you fall, you're all experiencing the same kind of emotional roller coaster of uncertainty, of desire, of loss, of grief, and everything in between, and a full mixture of others. And of course, the temptation is to want to bury it in some way, either because it's not welcomed. Like you say, you told your husband, and I forgive you, let's move on, regardless of the fact that probably neither of you were ready to move on at that stage. That's
Mm-hmm.
just putting it away. Let's pretend it's not there. Let's just, we'll keep it in the cupboard, lock the door, throw away the key. But of course, that's not allowing it to be there. And then it comes back knocking.
Yeah, it's definitely how society has primed us.
Mhm.
Society has primed us to just, like you said, just tough it out, just shove it down, don't feel it. And once you start letting it bubble up to the surface, it's a lot to take in. But once you start pushing through it, it stops being this unsurmountable mountain, making mountains out of molehills. You can take this big thing, and after you discuss it and your brain, and we talked about shame and shame's big tie-in of, if you're not talking about it, you can say that you're not ashamed of it and that you just want to move on from it, but like your brain still wants to know why. If it's not bad, then why won't we talk about it? And then you can get down to the root of the shame, of, because it doesn't matter, nobody in this situation is walking away shameless. Everybody is affected.
It's interesting. Shame is almost like an identity.
Yeah. But once you verbalize it, you can release it and be like, oh. And for me, it was watching Chelsea do it, watching her online just take on the sharks, and me thinking, if I ever said that, like everything would end, my life would never go back to normal. And then watching her do it, and I was like, nothing's happening. Oh my gosh, everybody's moving on. People actually don't care. It's more about them than you.
Yeah.
Okay. That gave me a lot more boldness to be like, maybe I can actually talk about some of this stuff and get some of it off of my chest.
Isn't it amazing how we and I think this applies to all areas of life. We're so worried about what other people think, not just about things like affairs, but just like anything. It's all about that external validation. It's about that judgment. It's about trying to manipulate other people through people pleasing to get them to act in a way that we want them to, so that we can feel good. And we are so fearful of what other people's opinions are. And of course, the irony being, it's a bit like, you can sit in a group of people. Let's say you sit in a public place and you're maybe feeling a little bit anxious. And you're anxious because you might think people are looking at you, or people are judging you for the way you look, or the way you walk, or how noisy you are when you're eating, or like literally anything. And yet every other person, or most other people, are experiencing the exact same thing. They're sat there also worrying about what everybody else is thinking about, at least to
Mm-hmm.
some degree. So we're kind of all in this pot of just self-judgment. And like you say, it's not so much that nobody cares, it's just that people are so involved within themselves that they haven't really got time or effort to be worried about your things. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and that doesn't mean, like I say, that doesn't mean that they're not interested. It just means that they're so worried about what people think about them that
Mm-hmm.
they really haven't got the mental capacity or space to be able to worry about what some stranger on the internet says.
Mm-hmm.
It's really
And I
fascinating.
found that relieving. And
Yeah, so much
for
so.
me, I was like, oh my gosh, okay, so this thing that happened doesn't actually have to define me as a person. Like, it can just be this thing that happened, and we can start to move on from it. And then the more you open up, the more people open up to you and are like, I had a run in here, or my parents growing up had this situation, or almost every single person who I open up to about the business that I'm assisting in, is they all almost always come back with something, some impact that they also experienced. And I'm just like sitting here like, I thought I was alone for a decade. I thought I was gonna die with this shame on my, like with this chip on my shoulder from this thing. And then you start opening up, and then they're relieved that they can talk to you about it because you're the first person who's opened like a safe space for them. And it's just been positive after positive after positive, it seems. The more open that I am, the more open others are, the less judgmental I am. With that judging thing, I had seen like a video or something, and it was someone being like, I realized that I was the judgmental one because I was creating all these judgmental characters and assuming the worst out of everybody, when really it was just me assuming the worst. Once I stopped thinking people were judging me, the amount of people that were just genuinely good people actually surprised me.
Yeah. Yeah. So powerful. I love
So,
it.
yeah, for some redirection, would you mind doing like kind of just a retelling of your story, just for anyone who hasn't seen the prior episodes? Yeah, just like a retelling of your story, how infidelity impacted you, and how you ended up here today, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, of course. So I suppose my story actually probably started a bit earlier than I initially gave credit. So my mother and father, they separated and divorced when I was 4 years old. My sister at the time, I think, was only 7 weeks old, very, very young. And my dad had had an affair, and he ended up moving out and going to live with the affair partner at the time. And I mean, I wasn't quite, sort of, I would say I was 4 years old. There's only so much you can really sort of understand and comprehend at that time. But they ended up having a couple of kids, so my two half sisters. And I was not a particular fan of the other woman, for, I suppose, for in some ways for logical reasons, but actually just because she probably wasn't the greatest of human beings, in all honesty. And I know that might be quite subjective coming from my opinion, but I feel like I have evidence. So I suppose that was like my first introduction into like the impact that betrayal and it's just like the elements of deceit, what effect that can have on people, but also acknowledging that it actually happens. It's not just some mysterious thing. It is something that is very real, and it affects many people in many ways. And also that although it's very easy to sort of play almost victim and perpetrator in these situations, the reality is that it's always way more complicated than that. And okay, maybe I didn't really fully comprehend that as a 4-year-old child, of course, but reflecting back and sort of seeing how both my mother and father handled it, and how particularly how my mum handled it, there was always a real intent to maintain a good co-parenting relationship. And even though there may have been arguments and things that went on behind closed doors, I was never witness to it. Like, as far as I was concerned, my dad would come and see us quite regularly. Mum and dad got on really well. And okay, yes, they didn't live together anymore. And I knew that there was this other person. And then, of course, a couple of years later, there was more children. And I understood all of that. But I really kind of respected that in some sense, or at least I certainly respect it now looking back. That said, it wasn't all plain sailing. Sort of through my teenage years in particular, I had this really challenging relationship with my dad where I got on with him really well. We didn't argue and fall out or anything, but of course he was always coming and going. So it kind of felt like I was always having to say goodbye. And at one point I genuinely really, really wished that he was dead, because at least I would only have to say goodbye once. I remember really feeling that, particularly like going through puberty and the hormonal changes that I was experiencing. And yeah, really, really, really challenging. And it was interesting because it was kind of at that point or around that point that I made this sort of commitment to myself that I would never get married. And my reason for never getting married was so that I would never be able to get divorced. I thought, well, that's one surefire way of avoiding divorce. It's like, well, if I don't get married, I can't. Like, so I kind of went through I was obviously willing to have, I say obviously, I was willing to have long-term relationships. I just marriage wasn't a necessity for me. I really did see it as just a piece of
It's a
paper.
really logical solution. You came up
Well,
with a
yeah,
logical solution for sure.
yeah, exactly. Really simple. It made sense. It's like that was perfectly fine for me. And then I had various relationships sort of through my late teens and early 20s, right up until the point where I met my wife to be, and I was 28 at the time. And very quickly, my rules about marriage changed. And with no external pressure, it was interesting. It was just like a switch flicked in my head. And all of a sudden, I remember thinking, I want to marry this woman. I want to marry her. That's it. The end. So I will, or at least I'll ask, and that's what I did. And so she said yes, and we got married, and we sort of lived the relatively stereotypical Western life. We got married, we had kids, we got a house, we did grown-up stuff. We both worked full time. That was a necessity for us financially, but we were comfortable, and at least as far as I was concerned, pretty happy. We'd been married for nearly 8 years when I'd become injured. I was both of us were recreational runners, and I injured myself at the time, and ended up not being able to run for several months. And up until that point, I would regularly run with one of my friends who lived literally just across the road from us. And he was a good friend. He would come round and knew the kids and knew my wife, and and we were just sort of like a collective group. Although I suppose technically I'd sort of met him first, but I didn't really consider him necessarily any more my friend than her friend. But he was our friend, I suppose. And as I was injured, she started running with him more, which was just natural. Again, no real concern for me at the time. But then as the sort of months went by, there just seemed to be some changes, like subtle changes in her behavior, just silly little things in terms of the way that she was with her mobile phone. Her just, again, really subtle behavioral patterns, like when she came in the house, she would just do things in a slightly different order, like stuff that was like, you'd be like, that's weird, and then sort of think nothing of it. And then something else.
Stuff that like your gut picks up on, but
Yeah,
your brain and your heart's not letting that connection be made, but your gut's sitting
exactly.
there.
Hey,
Yeah.
there's something different. There's something different, even if it can't really sort of pinpoint exactly what it is. And then over a period of time, enough of these things started to mount for me to start to make that connection cognitively and realize that something wasn't right, although I couldn't quite pinpoint it. And at that point, I genuinely believed that they were friends, and good friends, and they had a shared sense of humor, and they got on really well. And he was, he's a funny guy. I mean, he was my friend. I did get on with him really well. And so I confronted her initially and said that, look, I'm just not comfortable with like the current dynamic or setup of the relationship. And I wasn't really accusing her of anything specifically. It was more a case of I could see how if this friendship continued on the same trajectory that I was sort of projecting, and I suppose on the one hand, it was really useful for me to be the kind of person that thought I could predict the future. Like, that was one of my superpowers, or at least I believed it was one of my superpowers. Obviously, it wasn't, but
I had that as a superpower
yeah,
for quite a few years as well.
Yeah. I still have a soft spot in my heart for that, because I also feel like I have plenty of evidence to support my superpowers.
Yeah.
And so I suppose I foresaw that this current friendship, the way it was, there was a combination of factors at play, but this current friendship as it was, it's just, to me, saw like it was just taking these gradual steps. Maybe there were certain boundaries were crossed in terms of like the type of things that they would talk about that maybe wouldn't be appropriate between a married woman and a single guy, and particularly a single guy who was a friend of me and, well, all of us, collective. And anyway, she was very dismissive of it at the time, and it was very deflective. And I didn't really see it as deflection at the time, but looking back, it definitely came across as very deflective, the way that she handled it. And so I actually approached him separately as well, shortly after, and he also actually quite convincingly said the same thing. And to be honest, I agreed. I believed them. I believe that it was just like a bit like a brother-sister relationship, and they just got on really well. And I genuinely believe that part was true. And maybe at that point, nothing more was happening. Maybe there were some thoughts. Maybe there were like ideas. Maybe there was some fantasy. I don't know.
I think it's really easy to deceive yourself at the same time. Like, it's too complicated to admit that the feelings are escalating. And so there's this period of time where you're speaking your truth, but there's this internal part of you that knows.
And I think as well, when you're in a position where you're in a committed relationship and you have committed to a person, there's almost like a safety net, I suppose, from her perspective. I mean, like there's like a safety net. Well, I'm married. I'm not going to have an affair. I'm not going to let it go too
Hmm.
far. So therefore, I can risk it going closer to that boundary than I perhaps otherwise would,
Yeah, I
because
could
I know that I'm
never
not going to
do
step over
that.
it.
I
Yeah,
was never it infidelity did not impact my life, so it was never an option for me. I didn't know anything about it. Like when it got introduced, I felt completely blindsided because if I was like I could never do that. And when you don't think about something and you just decide you could never do it, it's really easy to end up completely self-abandoning.
yeah, 100%, exactly. And so, of course, I'm never going to know her exact lived experience. We have spoken about it quite a lot, but again, it's still subjective. And also, her being able to sort of like accurately recall exactly what she was thinking and feeling and her own internal justifications at the time. I mean, I know more than enough now, based on the work that I do, that that's actually quite an unrealistic expectation to have of of somebody anyway, because our moods change multiple times per day. We're often thinking and feeling things that seem logical and rational at one point and then not so much the next. We're excited about something and then we're feeling a bit more lethargic about it. So the same thing is true in all areas of emotional experience. So anyway, over time, over the period of the next, I don't know, 6 months potentially, I'd chosen to trust them both, and gradually it came to a point where I realized that something more was going on. There was more time out of the house. There were more little sort of subtle cover-ups, and because they were running together, they were both using Strava to log their runs, and there started to be these kind of weird little overlaps. And of course, I then became this like obsessive, wanting to check everything to try and figure it out to see if my intuition was there. And I was felt like I was going insane because every time I brought anything up, it was being denied or deflected. So is it me losing the plot? Am I just being paranoid? Am I going to risk ending my own relationship just because I don't trust my wife and I'm choosing not to trust her because I'm going crazy and I'm reading something into something that's not really there? And it's interesting because when it finally did come to the point when I did find out, that when it was admitted, then the overwhelming emotion I felt was relief.
Mm.
I felt like the previous 3 or 4 months had been hell, like of uncertainty, like every day driving to work and sort of like pulling up in lay-bys and crying my eyes out and going to the restroom every opportunity at work just to get some time on my own because I couldn't hold what I was feeling back in. And I worked in a very male-dominated environment. I was in a workshop at the time. It was like, very sort of practical, hands-on tools, making stuff, and surrounded by lots of guys that were like that as well. And so it really, really sort of started to isolate me more and more and more. And I'd not told anybody, even about my suspicions. I'd not discussed it with anybody at all. The only person I discussed it with was her. And so eventually there was something that happened which made it pretty clear something was going on. Like it was to the point where she couldn't really deny it anymore. It was, as I suppose, as close to what I'm going to describe as evidence, although arguably it probably wouldn't have held up in court. And she admitted it, and like I say, I felt that initial sense of relief. But I was also very clear in my mind that I wasn't prepared to just walk away from it either. This was more than just, this was more than, I wasn't prepared to just throw the marriage away for the sake of what I had
Mm-hmm.
experienced. But I also wasn't prepared to just pretend that what had happened hadn't happened, that there were conditions, there were boundaries that I had for myself. And they were pretty straightforward. He had to be out of our lives. She had to want us to work. Like, even if she wasn't feeling the romantic feelings that she perhaps thought that she should to maintain the marriage, I wanted to at least have that goal. And then sure enough, if a year down the line that we were still in that place and it was all gone and there was nothing there, then fine, we'd revisit it. But at that point, that was important to me. And also, I didn't want to stay together just because of the kids, because of money, because of logistics, because of any of those external things. This had to be just about me and her. And over the next month or so, essentially, was kind of waiting for her to make a decision, which was a very, very uncomfortable period of time where she was sort of dipping in and out. She was trying to cut contact with him, but then she couldn't and found herself going back, and it just got too much, and she felt like completely stuck because she felt obligated to me. I think, at least, again, I'm sort of taking words from here, but from my understanding, she felt obligated to me as her wife, and because obviously we did have children, and then there's the family and all of the things that involves. But her heart at that particular point was definitely with him. There's no question. Again, sort of talking about it since, it seemed very clear that on reflection, she never really saw him as being like the lifelong thing. It's not like she thought that she would leave and live happily ever after. I don't think that was really the case. I think she recognized it more as an escape from the mundane, the routine, everything that existed within our relationship, or at least her interpretation of it, which is also, I always find, again, it's just highlighting the difference about how two people see the same situation so differently. For me, that period, although I acknowledged some of the stuff for definite, I also kind of acknowledged it as being like, we've got 2 young children, we're both working full time. Like, this is a period of our lives where we're just going to have to like knuckle down and just let's function and make sure that we are communicating and doing the basics. And yes, it is going to be a little bit harder, and maybe I was a bit delusional. Maybe I believed that happiness lived over the hill. Like, just once the kids got to this age, then it would be okay. Maybe I was also being a little bit unrealistic, but it was clear that we weren't communicating, or at least I felt that she wasn't communicating how she felt about me and how she felt about the relationship, like openly and honestly. And then by the time it came to this, it was almost like too much water had gone under the bridge, and she was in a place where she couldn't make any other decision. So I actually ended up, she basically didn't make a decision. So I ended up making the decision based on the fact that, well, based on the boundaries that I just mentioned. Like, I wasn't prepared to stay in that situation under those circumstances.
That's great.
So
that you understood that the boundaries were for you and not for her it wasn't an ultimatum situation.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
That's such a huge thing.
Yeah. And it was hard, it's easy to say it. And I think that's true for any boundary. Boundaries are made up of a request and ultimately a consequence. It's like, if you continue to behave this way, then this is what I'm going to do to protect myself. But there's zero expectation for you to change how you behave. It's like you can continue to do whatever
they treat them like
want.
They're such a threat, and it's a me thing, not a you thing.
It's almost like people use it as a way to control, manipulate, ultimatum. Like, that's not what a boundary is. That's an expectation. Different story.
Yeah.
Hey, Chelsea.
Hi, Chelsea. Welcome. Welcome to your podcast.
Yeah, welcome to your podcast.
It's great to have you here. This is our podcast, though. There's no me in team. Well, there is if you deconstruct it.
Yeah, if you deconstruct
yeah, Taylor Swift has a song about that, doesn't she?
Yeah, something like that.
Anyways, thanks for having me back in the studio. I'm late. My house flooded.
That's okay. We got an Airbnb introduction.
Oh, good. And I was listening to that conversation. That was fucking fire.
It's been good conversation.
I seriously, Luke, when Anne-Marie and I were talking about boundaries, whenever we were like brainstorming an episode on it, I was like, what is something that protects you from the elements that you don't have to talk about for it to be effective? And she was like, sunscreen. I was like, oh my God. That's the freaking analogy for boundaries. It was so good. I love that you're getting so involved with the business. I hear your name floating around a lot now from all the people internally. They're like, where'd you find him? He's very interesting to listen to. And I'm like, I know.
Well, thank you, I think.
You're so welcome. So we're going to change up the style a bit, right? You found us a story.
We do, yes.
And did you already read it?
No, I haven't. No.
Oh, I definitely want to hear this story.
The story that I have found is essentially, well, the title is "I'm in an affair with a married woman and it's tearing me apart."
Oh, that's right. We talked about getting the perspective of the other man who is unmarried.
Yes.
Oh my God,
Yeah.
I love this.
Yeah.
And it was
And
painful. Why was it painful to read through that perspective?
It's interesting because there's a mix. Because one of the reasons I wanted this story is because I feel like I've always wanted to try and better understand the position of the person in the situation within my own story.
Same.
Yeah. And of course, I've not had a conversation with him. We've not had this discussion, you know.
Also, there's too much at stake. I think it's important to know who you can have these types of discussions with and who you can't. And I think that that's like your boundary, your own boundary kind of.
What am I really wanting to gain from it? There's obviously an element of curiosity, but there's also an element of wanting to be able to use what I learned from that to be able to help other
people.
people.
You also said it in the beginning. You said that you seek understanding.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really rad. And dictating who it is that's going to provide you with that is obtuse, and you are far from obtuse. And so I think I want to know why it was painful.
Well, why it was painful reading it?
Yeah.
I suppose maybe painful is not quite the right word, but maybe more
infuriating.
No, not even infuriating.
Because I get infuriated.
More raw. I mean, there's just like a rawness to it, I suppose. And it's not like, I reflect back to the time. I reflect back to what I was thinking at the time and what my perceptions were at the time. And I suppose there's an element of validation. Like, okay, yeah, this is how I kind of pictured.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you're saying that
not.
Basically the self-expression leads you to a place where you feel like the author is working to validate their experience
to an extent
of learning from their experience.
Yes, instead of learning from, absolutely. And I think that this particular story is very much at that point.
I do think that the level of awareness you have anytime that you're reading someone express themselves, it becomes quite a frustrating experience because you're like, it's so simple from my vantage point, like what you're doing versus what you want to be doing. So I totally hear you on the painfulness piece. Because even for me, whenever this whole thing started, it was like reading people's stories and listening to them express themselves sincerely without hesitation was difficult because it created an internal conflict among desire. Because it's almost like what I want for you is better than what you want for yourself. And then I come to this place and I'm like, why do I want for anyone but me?
Yeah, and it is so true. And I think particularly in the early stages of me really sort of digging into this topic in my coaching business, and obviously having people pour out their life, stories, I suppose, the simplest way, their souls, if you like, and like very quickly, again, because of my sort of professional position, is I actually find it very easy to disconnect and hold space and to not be affected by the emotion that other people are experiencing.
I can't wait for you to rub off on me, because I don't think I can do that very good yet.
And it's interesting because there's occasionally something just tweaks me, but it's very, very, very rare. Like very, very rare. And it's not because
same with me. And then people will say that I've just developed thick skin. And I'm like, I don't think it has to do with the width of my skin.
Not at all.
Or the depth of my skin. I think it has to do with my depth of understanding and like perception and stuff like that.
It's exactly that.
But then coming back, like I even, I'll say the hesitation I felt with this business was giving space to all of the stories that nobody's ever consumed before, because nobody's ever really written them. I was like, how does this change the trajectory of what happens after an affair? And will it be for good? And I feel like I'm coming off of an internal search of like, where's the bad in this? Where's the bad in this? And so it's really interesting hearing you, because as you've become more involved with the business, I've been like, all right, let's link arms. Like we can do this. I definitely think that I need your perspective. I feel like you have a very healed, betrayed perspective. And you also have a lot of life skills that lean themselves well to people that that want it, like people come to me because they want to learn how to do life differently. And I think they come to you for the exact same thing.
It's exactly the same thing. It is, yeah. And of course, we
I want to hear the story.
We are both a different beacon. We are both a different
me and
light.
You?
Yeah, we are, but we're also, I think we're unique in the sense, as in we both have our own unique beacon, our own unique light that draws in the people in their own unique ways,
Yeah.
And I think that's so important to recognize.
To accepting that.
Because it's so easy for you to sit there and say, oh yeah, well, I wish I could do this the same way that you do. But then I could also sit here and say, well, I wish that I could talk the way you do about certain things, and we could sit here and pull ourselves apart all day long. But exactly, yeah. And yes, we can learn from each other, but actually it's kind of our uniqueness that makes us as special as we are in our own individual right.
I freaking love you.
That is true for every single person listening as well. Like it's it's their uniqueness that makes them special.
And I'm just here so happy that both of you decided to even start talking about it. Because
well, what was funny was when I found out the name. When I found out the name of your podcast, Luke, I was like, "Son of a bitch." That's what I was going to name my podcast.
I got there quick. Unfortunately, that woman already wrote that book, so I was like, I can't have the monopoly on it. There's already the book called after the. I was like, damn, I was going to take the whole world over, but unfortunately, I was too late to the party. But I have managed.
Well, I was also late to the party and late to the podcast, so I really want to hear you read that story and also.
Yes, I bet it. Yes, it's a very
so fun to listen to. If you're not tired.
If you are the other woman in your relationship and you love this podcast, you would love the Other Women community. The Other Women community is a membership program designed to help other women just like you reclaim their relationship with themselves and heal from their affair. We provide a safe and supportive environment for you to open up and talk about your experiences. We give you the tools and resources you need to grow into an authentic, empowered individual. If you're ready to take the next step in your healing journey, head on over to theotherwomanandthewife.com/community to learn more about the membership and all it has to offer.
So I never thought I'd be posting something like this, but I really need to share my story and maybe get some advice. I'm 34, male, and I've been involved with a married woman for the past year. I know how this sounds, but please hear me out. We met at a mutual friend's party and immediately hit it off. She's smart, funny, and incredibly charming. The connection was instant and intense. I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, an emotional and an intellectual bond that was undeniable. It started innocently enough, but things escalated quickly, and before I knew it, we were spending a lot of time together. And she confessed that she was unhappy in her marriage. She told me her husband is emotionally distant, and they've been growing apart for years. She assured me that she planned to leave him, and that our relationship was the catalyst that she needed to make that change. I believed her because the love and connection that we shared feels so real. She promised me that she would file for divorce soon, and I held on to that hope. But now, a year later, I'm still waiting. Every time I bring it up, she has a new excuse. Her husband lost his job, and then she didn't want to add to his stress. Then her child was having trouble at school, and she needed to stay to provide stability. There's always something, and while I understand her reasons, it's becoming harder and harder to stay patient. I've started to notice other things too. We can never go out in public without a constant sense of paranoia. I have to hide our relationship from my friends and family, which makes me feel isolated and lonely. We only meet in discreet places, and while I cherish our time together, it feels like we're living in the shadows. I long for a normal relationship where we can just be ourselves without fear of getting caught. I've also begun to question whether she truly loves me or if I'm just a distraction for her. Sometimes she withdraws emotionally when I pour out my heart to her, and it leaves me feeling vulnerable and insecure. I know I shouldn't feel this way, but it's hard not to when you're constantly reminded that you're the other man. There are moments when I feel guilty for being part of something that might destroy her family. I never wanted to be a homewrecker, and I worry that the impact this could have on her children. I've read that affairs rarely lead to a successful new relationship, and second marriages have an even higher chance of divorce. and these thoughts haunt me, but my feelings for her keep hanging on. I can't help but think about the future. What if she never leaves her husband? Am I wasting my time on a relationship that will never fully materialize? Should I give her an ultimatum and risk losing her altogether? Part of me is terrified of being alone again, but another part knows I deserve better than being someone's secret. Despite all this, I find it impossible to walk away. The emotional connection we have is so strong that it overshadows the pain and the uncertainty. I've invested so much into this relationship, and the thought of losing her breaks my heart. But I'm starting to realize that I need to look out for my own happiness too.
Wow. What do you think? When you first read this story, what did you think?
It's weird. So like I said before, there's so much where I could sort of see how this is what I kind of thought the AP in my story, like how he was thinking, like how he saw, almost like he was saving her, saving my wife from something.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Like there's an element of that. Particularly like the bit that was strung, the particular bit initially for me. Like this is more like a personal response to this
like
question.
Your wife needed to be he felt like your wife needed to be rescued from him.
Yeah, like she was unhappy, and
which
would make
interesting.
sense because she, I believe, would, one of the things that was very appealing to her about the affair was the fact that it was a release from all of the stuff that existed at home. In terms of just like the mundane,
it was like
the
her
routine,
own little
the
thing.
kids, it was that exit. Yeah, like her own thing, and of course people find all kinds of different things, and this was hers. And because initially it started in that sense of like harmless, just fun connection, humor, and then it became more. And then of course, as the betrayed spouse or the suspicious spouse would question it further, that would almost reinforce the wall between the two parties. So particularly when I read that paragraph, I kind of feel like that's not what they experienced collectively. Maybe.
It's really interesting because whenever I think about the idea of an affair being an escape, I'm like, what are we escaping from? And why are we building lives where we need an escape? And I think that that's at the crux of it. I also think that if you ever feel like someone needs to be saved, you really have to be like, not it. Because then they're the ones who have to kind of like figure out how to save themselves. But it's so interesting that that was where your attention went. And because I think that, my ex definitely, he was like the most difficult, I think, at the end of it. And I hate talking about my ex. I really hate it. He's not signed up for this gig at all. But anyways.
I feel similarly as well, to be fair.
He was like the guilt that he felt in the wake of my departure. And I was like, how could you possibly be guilty? How could you possibly be guilty of just like living your life and me not speaking up? And I think that even with that whole thing, I was always like, he never really did anything to create an environment where it wasn't safe to speak up or anything. I just didn't know how to use my own voice. Yeah. I didn't know how to develop a sense of self. I didn't know that I was important. Like other people could tell me I was important, but I didn't know it for myself type thing. And so even whenever you talk about you immediately wanting to go to the, I'm guilty of having a marriage that my wife wanted to be rescued from, is so interesting to me.
It is interesting to me as well. Even being with, I know, and I think that's what makes it quite unusual for me. And I think
it's also just like your propensity to take responsibility for a situation that isn't yours too.
Because we can't control the other people in our lives, but we can influence. We can have an impact on the people around us, and we can support, we can guide, and we can nurture. And there becomes a fine balance in terms of releasing the responsibility that we feel obligated to when it comes to our partners in an attempt to try and create this perfect environment for them. Like, that's unrealistic under every sense of the word.
Yeah.
But to also sit there and see the person that you love finding something in someone or something else, and it isn't always another person. Sometimes it could be in their work, sometimes it could be in other additional sources. But to not feel some responsibility, like some, even if it's just a responsibility to me, did I show up in the way that I truly wanted to show up? It's not necessarily did I show up in the way that she needed me to, but was I truly living in line with my own values? Was I truly being the husband and the person that I claimed in my own mind that I was? Or was I playing a part and not acting it out properly? And this is not about self-blaming. It's not about apportioning that I'm the reason. And I definitely do not think I'm the reason at all. But like any of these situations, what can we take from this? And
I think it's discovering the opportunity to learn. Like, that's exactly what you're doing. You're not taking responsibility or assigning blame. You're sitting there and you're like, how did this come to be? And how did I play a part in it? And was I intrinsically aligned with what fulfills me? And like taking that as an opportunity to learn more about yourself. And I think that's commendable.
Yeah.
What about, so it's funny that your attention was drawn there.
So I was going to say, what was your attention drawn to?
Oh my God, the part where he's like, the undeniable connection, the unplanned compatibility, the intrinsic draw towards another human being on the planet that you had no intentions of connecting with, I think, is such a mystical, magical portion of life. Even if I think about, just in general, not even infidelity related. Yes, that connection romantically is a powerful one. But even the connection that I have with the two of you sitting right here, right? I put myself out there, I had a call to action, and you guys responded. And now I feel connected to you guys in a way where I can trust you with aspects of me that I don't trust everybody else with. And that's always kind of been wondrous to me in a way where I'm like, what is this? What is this thing that pulls us all together? And when that happens inside of a marriage, why does it all of a sudden become the thing that tears us apart? And so for this guy who's writing this story, and he's like, the connection was undeniable on both accounts, right? They acted on it. It was materialized, actualized, all of that. And there's this fear, like in his statement where am I just a distraction? Is it love or am I just a distraction? And I think anytime we go into these like duality questions, which I do a lot on the internet because it works for content, so back off, people. But what if it's both? Like, why can't it be more than one thing? And then doing the deep dive into why are we building lives that we have to escape? What is actually satisfying for the individual in achieving all of these status symbols, I'll say.
Yeah.
Marriage, family, home ownership, like all of it. And then we sit there and we complain about them constantly. And then when we feel badly for complaining, then we just stop expressing ourselves entirely. And then we just start to dwindle. And so for that guy, even at the end of his story, right, he comes to this place where I know my happiness is my responsibility and how I'm spending my time is my responsibility. Hopefully, maybe. I actually have no hopes for him. I don't know. But removes himself, right? Like he knows he has acknowledged a need for change. And I think acknowledgement is probably the first.
His beginning, that part is like, it's almost like he's sort of, and of course, I doubt that the journey happened in the time that he took to write that post, but it sounds like that journey has been happening in his mind of shifting through that perspective so that he's beginning to get to the point where he can now even, retrospectively see and sort of revisit all of the things that have led up to this point. And I think it's interesting when you're talking, you use that context of duality, and immediately comes up for me is like the fact that people just see things so binary. Like there's this like decision making. There should be like a class in school just on how to make decisions, or what even decision making even is.
What it's comprised of. Hey, I've got a course and we're doing that in a lesson.
Good. Because it's the irony. And I think the interesting thing is that people think that not making a decision isn't a decision. It's like, that is a decision.
It's a decision to not make a decision.
And so let's say so at the minute people see it in like there's three possibilities. So let's say you can bring that awareness to someone and they can acknowledge that not making a decision is in fact a decision. So where they thought they had two decisions, they either do this thing or they don't do this thing. We've now introduced this third, which is I'm not going to even decide which one I'm going to do, which is the third decision. But of course, then even that is still way, way too simplistic, because let's just assume that the decision was 1 and 0. And we've got 1 on one end of the scale and we've got 0 at the end of the scale. We've got this line that joins these two things, these two decisions, 1 or 0, yes or no, black or white, right or wrong, whatever the thing is. That line can be subdivided virtually an infinite number of times. There are so many places between 1 and 0 that exist, but yet people get stuck. Like, I can only be one or the other. And of course, that has been so heavily perpetuated. I don't want to overstate it, but like so heavily perpetuated in the last 20 years with social media and politics and all the things. Like, it's ideologies.
Also,
and it's like
infidelity content, right?
Yeah,
which
100%.
one am I going to choose?
Yeah.
And it's like, what if you just chose to be honest? What if we started, instead of choosing other people, we started making choices for ourselves? And I think that's ultimately what I was really falling in love with words like, for some reason, the word genuine and sincere, like everyone using the word sincerely in their sign-offs. I was like, why the fuck does everyone say this? And so then I started to look at the etymology of the word and I was like, are they saying things they don't mean? Because that was a pretty fucking passive-aggressive email. Like, what's going on here? And like studying the art of communication. And so I started falling in love with words like sincere and genuine. And then I decided that I wanted to be those things. And then when I ended up in an affair, I was like, these are not me. These things that I'm doing are not me. Oh, wait, they are, because I'm the one doing them. And then I had a choice. And I don't really know what the difference between a choice and a decision is, but I guess a decision is more made up of commitments. But
the choice, I suppose, is like you are creating. It's the part of the decision making process whereby you are creating the options that are available to you by act of choosing, versus decisions versus options that are made available to you from external, in which case then it becomes a decision.
Yeah.
So it's like you are actively seeking. So it's a bit like being drawn towards rather than responding to or reacting to, if that makes sense.
Totally. It's like a conscious choice.
Yes, a very conscious choice. Yeah. And I think it's because I think decisive, although I doubt that it has etymological links to divisive, but when I hear the word, just the fact that it sounds so similar, I often I find that when we make a decision, it's almost like we're dividing the options, which doesn't feel the same. It doesn't feel the same. It hasn't got the same kind of like healthiness to it, to choosing.
Yeah.
It feels like I'm chopping off that one bit.
Oh, it's more forced, isn't it?
Yeah. Again, this is not my area of expertise in terms of the way the meanings of the words, but in terms of
real
making
talk,
those decisions.
Real talk for real people. We do not need to be like, I'm coming off this huge wave of, I need to have all of these, I need to read all of these books before I talk to people. I need to do all of these things. And I'm like, the energy of need. Why do I do this to myself?
So that's interesting.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this podcast episode. We appreciate your support and would love to hear your thoughts on it. If you've made it this far, you're likely someone who is invested in the journey of being the other woman. We understand that this can be a difficult and complex experience, which is why we offer guided coaching to help you heal and move forward. We encourage you to explore the links in the episode description or visit theotherwomanandthewife.com/coaching to learn more about our exclusive coaching program and apply today. Thank you again for your support, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode.